Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. My name is Faika Naseem, and as the Master of Ceremony for today, I would like to welcome you to State Bank of Pakistan's webinar for a public consultation on the Banking on Equality policy. This policy is a landmark initiative by State Bank of Pakistan aimed to reduce the gender gap in financial inclusion. Today's event is very important to us, and I'm honored that we were able to be joined by an august panelist and esteemed participants. And we're glad that a lot of people have also joined us on Facebook. So we will begin the webinar with the recitation of the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Jazakallah, thank you. Now I would like to invite Governor State Bank of Pakistan, Dr. Raza Bakir, to please give his opening and welcome remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Faiga. Let me begin by welcoming the viewers who are with us today live on the State Bank of Pakistan's Facebook page. The 130 plus invited registered guests who are with us today, and especially let me welcome our esteemed international panelists and thought leaders who are with us today. Princess Zara Agha Khan, whose services for Pakistani people through the Agha Khan Developer Network need no elaboration. Ms. Jayla Pazarbasholu, Director of IMF's Strategy, Policy and Review Department, and the department that is often described as the most powerful department in the International Monetary Fund, which determines IMF's policies and signs off on all lending and programs that the IMF does. And our moderator, Dr. Anita Zaidi, President of Gender Equality at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that has been instrumental in improving health, nutrition, and financial inclusion in Pakistan, and an institution that has been giving support to the State Bank in many other areas as well. And our Deputy Governor, Seema Kamil Saiba, who's in charge of our agenda on financial inclusion and digital financial services. I thank you all for being with us here today. Today's event has three goals. The first and overarching objective today is to promote awareness of the all-important and shared goal of reducing the gender gap in financial inclusion in Pakistan. Our Deputy Governor, Seema Saiba, when she gets the floor, will talk to you at the beginning about how big that gap is. By being with us today at this event, by hopefully talking about this event with your colleagues, with your friends and your family, by sharing this event on social media, and by interacting with us in subsequent events, you are already helping us achieve this first goal of bringing awareness to the need to do more to reduce the gap in financial inclusion between men and women. The second goal today is to share with all of you what the State Bank of Pakistan is proposing to do about promoting the financial inclusion of women in Pakistan. Our Deputy Governor, Seema Kamil Saiba, will shortly share with you a short presentation with the key elements of the strategy we are launching today for consultation, a strategy called Banking on Equality. This strategy lays out a roadmap for how the state bank proposes to work with financial institutions, especially banks, to attain specific targets for raising the financial inclusion of women in Pakistan. Now, the third goal today is to get your feedback. At today's event, we will get feedback from our esteemed international panelists, as well as our registered guests who may wish to ask questions during the webinar. For the rest of the viewers who are with us today, I want you to know that today is the launch of this consultation, not the final strategy yet. So you will have an opportunity over the coming weeks to share your feedback with us. At the State Bank, after today, we are going to be doing dedicated sessions with banks, especially with microfinance banks and institutions, which have a large fraction of their clients, which are women, with chambers of commerce, with women in business, and particularly finding some ways to have conversations with excluded women. We will be having these sessions dedicated to get feedback on what we will be sharing with you today. And once we have received sufficient feedback, this strategy, Banking on Equality, will be launched to anchor our efforts in this area so we may measure our performance on how well we are doing to achieving the goals of this strategy. Promoting women's financial inclusion is a goal that is and needs to be shared amongst several institutions and organizations, both in the public and the private sectors. Given the number of such institutions that have a role to play in this area, the question arises, what is the role of the State Bank of Pakistan in this space? And I'd like to share a few thoughts on this. But to begin with, and first and foremost, many people wonder, why should a central bank be interested in this cause? After all, the traditional view of central banking is that the central bank should concern itself with price and financial stability and support growth. However, in recent years, there has been a growing recognition that central banks, particularly in emerging markets where there are important market failures, need to support the goal of financial inclusion. This is especially so because central banks regulate banks and other financial institutions and are in a unique position to use regulation to address exclusion from the financial system of key sections of the society, such as women, but also other excluded areas such as SMEs, rural populations, and other marginalized groups. Simply put, without regulatory action in well-prescribed circumstances, there may not be any improvement in the state of under-provision of financial services in developing and emerging markets. So while we are learning that central banks have an important role to play in this area, it is also important to realize that the central bank has to remain within its perimeter to support this goal and cannot take the lead in areas which are outside its mandate, such as laws, such as labor regulations, such as social norms, and the like. Thus, at the State Bank, we see two roles for ourselves in taking forward the work on this important agenda of reducing the gender gap in financial inclusion. First is to use our direct role as the regulator of the financial system to get a dialogue between the providers of financial services and the marginalized users of financial services, and to implement the needed policies from a regulatory perspective. The second role is that of a coordinator of work on financial inclusion more generally, and to form partnerships with other institutions to promote this cause. And this includes partnerships domestically with particular parts of the government, domestically with particular NGOs and other institutions, as well as partnerships internationally. I want to convey a message to everybody today that the State Bank is very keen and open to form such partnerships. So if we don't reach out to you, reach out to us. And I especially want to mention one international partnership that we are beginning thanks to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, through whom and with their help, we are partnering with Stanford University on developing gender initiatives and impact assessment tools, which we hope to use as part of our banking on equality strategy. So, with these thoughts, let us turn to the content of today's event and walk you through our banking on equality policy. For this purpose, I'm delighted to introduce to you someone who exemplifies financial inclusion of women, our Deputy Governor, Ms. Seema Kamil Sahiba. A few months ago, Seema Kamil Sahiba was president and CEO of one of the largest private banks in Pakistan, UBL, when I reached out to her to ask her to consider joining the State Bank. Not only is she an outstanding professional, she has also demonstrated women's financial inclusion through her own career. At the State Bank, Deputy Governor Seema Kamil Sahiba is in charge of two important and related areas: financial inclusion, of which women's inclusion is one key area, as well as digital financial services, which has a strong overlap with the goal of financial inclusion. Seema Sahiba has been overseeing the work on developing this strategy, and let me invite you to please walk us through the main elements of the banking on equality strategy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor Saab. And I'm really happy and excited to be here and tell you a little bit about what we are planning. So if I have screen share rights, please. And there we are. Okay, so before I begin, I'd like to thank everyone in the team at the State Bank who worked very hard on this, and also to thank people who have given input like the Pakistan Banks Association, the World Bank, and the Gates Foundation, among a host of others. When we talk about banking on equality, our basic premise of this policy is to try to embed women's financial inclusion as an imperative within the banks and the institutions that we regulate. And I use the word imperative because, as you'll see later, it's very important for us now. This is a bit of a statement of the obvious, but I think it bears repetition. So the fundamental is that all women should be able to gain access to financial services to close both the gender gap and the inequality gap. And we believe at the State Bank, and everyone believes within government circles and in Pakistan, we hope that this is not something that could be disputed. And as a consequence of that, and research suggests that if women are excluded, we do suffer on a macroeconomic level. And lastly, and very importantly, because the entities we regulate are commercial entities, the message to them is that women are the largest untapped market, and there is a significant business case. I've worked on this a lot personally in my previous roles, and it's quite undisputed that if you bring in women, you have this market. The FMCGs have long discovered this. And so there is a business case, and it is not CSR. A little bit of a bit of a, I suppose, depressing, but also an opportunity to talk about. The World Bank's demand side survey, called Findex of 2017, has some aspects to show us that we must take notice of. Men's account ownership from 2014 to 2017 grew from 21% to 35%. However, women's formal account ownership just grew from 5% to 7%. And women's access to credit remains very low at around 1%. If we look at the countries around us, we see that we need to do a lot. For example, Saudi Arabia, for women account ownership is at 58%, or Bangladesh is at 36%, or Turkey is at 54%. And then if you look at the graph on the right, or the bar charts on the right, you will see that the gender gap in many countries is actually increasing. So if you look at Pakistan, it went from 16% gap between men and women's account ownership to 28%. So obviously, as a central bank and as the governor said, we have to take notice. So it's not as if the central bank is doing nothing about it. So we've issued regulations for microfinance and branchless banking, which has eased the lives of women by providing credit and easy payment methodologies. We have a refinance and credit scheme for women entrepreneurs. It is now seeing increasing interest, but it needs to reach higher levels. Then we have, the government has worked on what is called the Prime Minister's Kamyab Jawan Youth Scheme, which is loans to younger population. And they have set a limit or a quota really that it must be 25% women. And we've reached 13% on that. The State Bank also has a national financial literacy program, which aims to educate both men and women. And by 2023, we hope to have reached 1 million. And 50% of those are to be women, and we're doing quite well on that. So these are the happier parts of the story. And by June 2020, we had 73 million unique accounts amongst the adult population. And amongst that, women's unique accounts were at 18.5 million. And if you look at active accounts, those were 11.7 million, or 18%. So since 2017, there has been progress, but there is still a way to go. And that is what we are trying to achieve by this framework. So this gender mainstreaming policy framework, which is up for consultation today, aims to push for a gender-specific focus in the financial sector. It's made up of 5 pillars, which involve the financial service providers, the state bank, obviously, and the wider community. And I would just like to briefly talk you through these pillars. Pillar 1 is gender diversity within financial institutions and access points. We believe that a financial institution cannot really begin to address the female customer without first addressing their own gender imbalance. And the numbers available to us, women are just 13.2% of the workforce in the banking sector, and the range is huge. It's between 2% to 32%. We know that some banks have done better than others, but there's a lot to be done. So the target that we are working with at the moment is that by 2023, or in 3 years' time, 20% of banks' workforce should be women. Of course, we will calibrate that according to the various banks, and we will have conversations with each bank on this. But the impact will then be the development of an inclusive culture within the financial institutions, which we believe is necessary to be inclusive towards customers. Moving on to pillar 2. At the moment, we have gender neutral product development. And as I've just mentioned, as that is largely men, the services and products offered do not really apply a gender lens, or as the Gates Foundation says, they are not gender intentional. We would like the financial institutions not just to have women's products, because very often that comes up with, and I will use that word, a rather silly feminization of products. But we would actually like them to look at all existing and new products and their sales strategies and the way they market their products through the view of a woman and how she perceives financial services. And at this time, I think I would need to really talk about the target segments. And I've always looked at 4, and there may be more. But the largest one in our country are actually homemakers or housewives, as we call them. And very often they are neglected. And it's very important that we make products and services for what is the foundation of our society, which is the home. And women that I have talked to in this area personally are very keen to be part, and particularly to save, because they're often mothers, which is the most respected part in our society, and they would like to save for their children, their education, their marriage, and their future. So with this gender lens, we feel that women will then be able to approach financial institutions and get products and services which are designed with their needs in mind. Moving to the third pillar, and that is gender sensitivity and women's champions. I once had a focus group with a group of women, some of whom had bank accounts and some who did not. And a lot of them said to me, and one thing I always remember, there was a woman who said that when she visits a corner shop or a fruit vendor, she is taken more seriously than when she visits a bank branch. This is something that is very telling and very important. So it's important for us that all touch points where a customer meets a financial institution is geared to receive them properly, and that they are women's champions. And I deliberately use the word touch points because now we are very rapidly moving from the bricks and mortar branch to digital. And our goal will be that at the end of 3 years, at least 75% of the touch points at financial institutions have women champions. And by women champions, we mean women and maybe men as well, who will actually understand and propagate within their setting how a woman should be welcomed, understood, valued, and above all, respected, because that really underlies everything that we do. And that staff undergoes gender sensitivity training. Moving on to pillar 4, which is talked about all the time, and yet progress has been slow, and that is collecting gender disaggregated data, which is currently not really being collected. We spoke a little while ago and said that 18% of women have active accounts. What that really means is that 18% of women have done one financial transaction in the last 6 months. We need far more data than that. So we will be asking financial institutions to put together data that allows us to make policy interventions, and for banks also to actually remove the barriers to women's financial inclusion in a more insightful manner with targets and impact assessment. And Dr. Barker has already mentioned the exciting work that we hope to do with the Gates Foundation and Stanford University on this. And we will keep you posted on how that develops. But data disaggregated for women and men is extremely important to this exercise. And then I move to the last pillar, which is a policy forum, because the journey doesn't stop with just our telling banks or asking banks what they should be doing. We need to continue this dialogue. And at the moment, we have some ideas, but we welcome everyone here on this webinar and who's listening on Facebook to tell us about how they think we should move this forward. But what we are thinking of is that we have a forum that meets regularly to discuss what we're doing right, what we could be doing better. And we would have banks there, microfinance, electronic money issuers, the SECP, various government entities, particularly SMIDA, and women entrepreneurs, and of course, more than anyone else, the women that are actually currently excluded. So those are the 5 pillars. And as where next steps are concerned, I'll just briefly say that we will now begin our consultative process. And towards the end, we will tell you the groups that we will engage with, obviously the banks, individually and together, but also women's chambers, women entrepreneurs, women who are thought leaders, and men, because without men, this journey becomes only halfway there. And then, of course, the women that we need to bring in to the financial inclusion as our goal. So that's just a rough preview and a first step about an outline of what we're planning. And I would like now to turn over to Dr. Anita Zaidi, who's going to be with our very exciting and eminent panel. Dr. Zaidi is, as you know, the head of gender equality, the president of gender equality at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So over to you, Anita, and we look forward to a very exciting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor Seema Kamil, for emphasizing the need to close the gender gap in financial inclusion. And I think you've already made a great start by coming up with the phrase banking on equality. I just love that. At the Gates Foundation, this is a brand new division that we have, of which I have the privilege of leading. Although my background is science, I am learning a lot about financial inclusion, and this is something that from my community work previously in Pakistan, I just know that we're on the right track here. I want to say Assalamu alaikum to all our audience who has joined us, and thank you so much for joining us today for what promises to be a really engaging conversation on this topic of financial inclusion for women, which has been convened by the State Bank of Pakistan. And on behalf of BMGF, it is a distinct privilege to be moderating today's discussion on banking for equality with some incredible champions of inclusive development whose combined work has made a tremendous impact across several developing countries and in Pakistan. Fighting inequality is not just a moral cause. Fighting inequality, we now know, is a bedrock of getting to progress and development. And we know that as a country, we cannot fully prosper if half of our population does not have access to the same opportunities as the rest. It's a matter of pride from us at the Gates Foundation to be partnering with the State Bank. You heard a little bit about this from Governor Bakir and from Deputy Governor Seema Kamil. We look forward to partnering in many aspects of financial inclusion in Pakistan. And I am just delighted to see progressive policy coming forward here for consultation with stakeholders. That will do a lot to address the barriers women face in accessing financial services. I hope that this is also a source of inspiration for other central banks to bring a gender intentional view to their policies and their regulatory environment. Let me now introduce our esteemed panel. We are very fortunate to have Princess Zara Agha Khan grace the occasion today. Princess Zara Agha Khan is a member of the board of directors of the Agha Khan Development Network. For 10 years, Princess Zara was the director of the Social Welfare Department and of the Health, Education and Planning and Building Services companies of the Agha Khan Development Network. Princess Zara serves in various leadership roles within the Agha Khan Development Network. I know her as a trustee of the Agha Khan University. And she is also a trustee of the University of Central Asia, a sister university of the Aga Khan University. She is a member of the board of directors for the Aga Khan Foundation, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, the Global Center for Pluralism, and the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat. Princess Zara, thank you so much for agreeing to grace our panel today. And I would greatly appreciate some opening thoughts from you on our topic today.
Thank you very much, Anita, and thank you, Dr. Raza Bakir and Deputy Governor Seema Kamil for inviting me to be present at this opening of a very, very important initiative from the State Bank of Pakistan. Gender equality and access to banking services and financial services around the world is essential for women, of course, as is access to all types of services. And in the Aga Khan Development Network, we have always tracked on an annual basis women's participation in all different fields and themes, from health and education to employment and access to industry, access to finance, and so on and so forth. We're very proud that for the last 50 years in Pakistan, we have been managing more than 150 co-educational and girls' schools at all levels of education, from kindergarten to higher secondary schools, and have trained thousands of women in the health services, from lady health visitors to community care nurses, midwives, and doctors. Women's access to education and to financial services is essential going forward, because ultimately women are the cornerstone of the family and the family's management of its resources. We have over half of our 48,000 students in Pakistan are girls. And it is extremely important that women are educated in order to access financial services. In this pandemic year, women have really led their families' efforts to protect themselves from COVID-19, and are the cornerstone of how the family responds to these things. The launch of this State Bank of Pakistan's gender equality framework is extremely encouraging, as women require banking services and access to capital and finance. Also, women need to be able to access careers in banking and finance in general. It's critical that women have access to this sector and have access to financial products. And I again thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, Princess Zara. And now let me introduce Dr. Jayla Pazar Bashalu. Dr. Pazar Bashalu is currently the Director of Strategy, Policy and Review Department at the International Monetary Fund. In this capacity, she leads the work on the IMF's strategic direction and the design, implementation, and evaluation of fund policies. She also oversees the IMF's interactions with international bodies such as the G20 and the UN organizations. Previously, Dr. Pazar Bashalu served as at the World Bank as the Vice President for Equitable Growth, Finance, and Institutions. Dr. Pazar Bashalu, may I request you to give some opening remarks on the occasion of the consultation, launch of the consultation of this new policy framework for financial inclusion for women.
Thank you, Anita, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this panel and discuss these important issues. I would like to congratulate the State Bank of Pakistan for this very important strategic initiative. This is important because the lack of financial access by women is a key constraint to growth, job creation, and economic diversification. And women are underrepresented at all levels of the global financial system, from depositors to being borrowers and being board members and regulators. And it's really great to see that State Bank of Pakistan has women at its highest levels in terms of the capacity, both in terms of financial sector regulation and supervision. And it's really critical, as the princess mentioned, that women are educated to be able to make best use of the access that they may get in terms of financial services. And what Dr. Bakir mentioned, both in terms of the link between financial services, access by women, and access to digital financial services is really critical, and very glad to see that there's progress in both of these areas. I want to just mention a few things. We had a recent IMF study that was published, which finds that greater inclusion of women as users, providers, and regulators of financial services has benefits beyond addressing gender inequality, because narrowing of the gender gap fosters greater stability in the banking system and enhances economic growth. Greater use of financial services by women, including accounts for financial transactions, savings, access to credit and insurance, which always gets forgotten, can have both economic and societal benefits. For example, women merchants who open a basic bank account tend to invest more in their businesses, while female-headed households often spend more on education after opening a savings account. So more inclusive financial systems in turn can really magnify the effectiveness of fiscal and monetary policies by broadening financial markets and the tax base. This is all the more important now. The COVID-19 pandemic threatens to roll back gains in women's economic opportunities, widening gender gaps. But yet there's also an opportunity. COVID-19 has led to acceleration of the use of digital financial services due to the need for social distancing. So it is really important that to allow digital financial services to help address constraints specific to women. For instance, it overcomes the mobility constraint. Women don't need to travel to a bank branch and can access mobile accounts from home. So this is really important to make sure that women, and more broadly, to gain access to digital infrastructure such as internet, mobile phones, and so on, and also along with addressing the barriers in financial and digital literacy and social norms that have led to wider gender gaps in financial inclusion. I want to finish with a particular appreciation of the pillar 4 of the strategy, which is the robust collection of gender disaggregated data and target setting. This is really critical to help policymakers to understand how well financial services providers are serving women and how effective their policies are in promoting full financial inclusion. And I really look forward to progress made this area, as was mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And our third panelist to complete the list is Dr. Raza Bakir, Governor, State Bank of Pakistan, whose commitment to financial inclusion for women was very well expressed in his opening statement. So let me come back to you, Princess Zara, with the first question. Can you talk a little bit about what do you think are the biggest challenges that women face today, and more specifically in the workplace? You did say a little bit about lack of education and how that should be a priority, but perhaps you would can, go further in your thinking on this.
Thank you, Anita. I think in my experience, women do a lot of the work in our society, but they are not often recognized in a formal setting and don't have a formal relationship with the banking and finance sector. Also, until now, and hopefully this is changing, but there are very few female role models, present company accepted, and many role models in Pakistan, but it's women are underrepresented in senior roles within organizations, banking being one of them, although today's panel obviously belies that. When a woman does reach a level of authority within an organization, whichever level that organization is at, she will face a struggle. She will face a double-edged sword of playing the female role and yet being pigeonholed to a certain extent because she is a woman. And therefore, I think we need more and more women to be recognized, as the State Bank of Pakistan is obviously promoting today, so that they can be role models and mentors and sources of inspiration for women in the next generations. But I also would like to second what Jayla just said, which is that technology is allowing us to break these boundaries, and it will allow us, women and men and rural populations and isolated populations, to access the services that have been until now very difficult to access. And I recognize all the banks and the institutions who are allowing this to happen for the populations and the women around the world and in Pakistan.
Thank you for that. And if I can put the second question to you, Jayla. So it's widely talked about and believed that diverse teams are better at anticipating risks and are more resilient during crises. DG Deputy Governor Seema Kamil also talked a little bit about this. How important is gender diversity in financial service providers' staff to improve overall women's financial inclusion in a country? Do you think that having more women as banking staff will change things?
Yes, because I think it's not just women, but broader perspectives and changes in terms of perspectives and bringing different viewpoints really makes a difference in terms of access and in terms of understanding of the needs of women more broadly in terms of whether it be it lending, be it access to insurance and access to savings. When we look now, women hold less than 20% of board seats in banks and bank supervision agencies and account for less than 2% of bank CEOs. So the numbers are not great right now, but there is a huge amount of initiatives, including what we are discussing today by the financial services industry itself to really change this. So I think it's important, and there is already some work both at the IMF and the World Bank that show that greater share of women leaders in financial sector, especially in fintech, are associated with lower gaps, lower gender gaps, and in digital financial inclusion. And that's because, as mentioned in the strategy of the State Bank of Pakistan, these are really critical to understand what is needed by women and how services can be directed to those specific needs.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Governor Bakir, moving to you. This is a Pakistan-specific question. We are a low-income country or a low-middle-income country, and we do not we are challenged by the quality of the data that we have. And how will you address this challenge going forward in the Banking of Equality policy implementation?
Dr. Anita, I'll address that question specifically, but also I just wanted to make a comment on your previous question about the need for greater participation of women in the labor force, particularly in financial services related industries. And I wanted to just point out one fact that may not be known to the viewers, which is the central bank of the world's central banks, i.e. the International Monetary Fund, has now demonstrated how it is leading from the front in terms of women's leadership in these areas. And both the current boss of the IMF and the previous boss of the IMF were both women. Kristalina as the current MD and Christine Lagarde as the previous MD. Christine Lagarde is now running the European Central Bank. So another very important central bank. And we have the good fortune to have with us Ms. Jayla, who is running, as I mentioned before, the what is considered to be the most powerful department at the IMF. So I think there is a growing trend to at least demonstrate in some areas of the financial sector that that the, that this is achievable, and they're also serving as very good role models. Now, I want to come to the issue of data, and as was mentioned in particular by Ms. Jayla, and she also gave us feedback earlier when she was at the World Bank. Good policy is based on good data. And we are struck by how hampered we are in terms of not having good gender disaggregated data. So as part of the policy, we will be requiring to get information from banks, not only for depositors, but also for lenders, and then by sector as well, SME, rural, and so forth, as to how much of the access is by women. And the first round of data that we collect will allow us to set a benchmark, and that's very critically important also for us, not only to form good policy, but also then to measure our performance. Because as was pointed out, we are at a level where we need to challenge ourselves more. And then we want to commit ourselves to using this data to demonstrate progress. And it's also, Dr. Anita, if I may mention, a way for us to credibly commit ourselves to doing this. Because once you publicly start disclosing data, you as a public agency now feel the heat to be able to demonstrate progress. And that's why we have this in this policy, and that's why we have a commitment to publish this data as well, so that we internalize as a central bank, and also help to internalize amongst the financial institutions the need to show progress each quarter and year on these goals that are setting ourselves.
Wonderful. And if I may have a sort of follow-up question to that, which is something that it bothers me a lot. And one of the reasons that I signed up for this new role at the Gates Foundation, Pakistan ranks third to last, 151st on the 2020 Global Gender Gap Report of the World Economic Forum. And in the World Bank's Global Findex 2017 report, that also highlights the glaring gender gap that exists in Pakistan in terms of account ownership, mobile phone access, internet access. How do you think different pillars that Deputy Governor Seema Kamil described, the 5 pillars, go towards addressing where we are on these indices, bringing us up?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So we have a big challenge, and the bigger challenge is the gender gap. And economic empowerment, of course, is a key element of that. We have to remind ourselves that as a central bank, we can very easily focus on the financial aspect of that, i.e., financial inclusion is an important part of economic empowerment, but it is not the entire part. There are important other interventions that are needed to achieve the goal of broader economic empowerment and reducing the gender gap. They pertain to many other areas. They pertain to legal areas. They pertain to finding role models and champions that can help change norms. And we have seen that happen in many other countries. Countries that today have high women's financial inclusion did not have it before. And these are countries from our region as well. And these are countries across different majority religions. So it is a matter of changing norms and institutions, and there is enough evidence to demonstrate that it has been done. Specifically for us at the central bank, we can first of all work with our regulatory institutions. We can have goals for them in terms of how they ramp up the hiring of women. Similarly, we need to hold ourselves accountable at the state bank for how we do that. We have the goal of products that are geared towards addressing women's financial needs. So as Deputy Governor Seema Kamil mentioned, a silly example of promoting women-specific financial products is to simply say something, and I'm going to give an example, to have pink checkbooks. That's not doing what we think is needed, which is to do research on the part of the banks using their marketing teams and research teams to figure out Say if you have small women-run businesses, salons, or food that many women are now making and selling to offices, what can banks do to be able to cater to that? If these women are not getting working capital, how can we get that to them? Similarly, in terms of the gender forum, we need a place, and this is where the role as a coordinator becomes very important. We need a place where different people come together and are able to share their perspectives and to advance the agenda on this, because right now there is also some lack of coordination across the different institutions on the work in this area. So all these 5 pillars, and look, this is a strategy for consultation. So if we think a pillar is redundant, or if we think a pillar needs to be added, we are completely open to it. That's why we're launching this consultation. And what we want to get at the end of the day is something that we think will concretely make the improvement on the disaggregated data that we'll be collecting.
Wonderful. I mean, in fact, we have a bunch of questions coming from our audience and some really fantastic comments as well, but we are running a little bit late, so I'm going to speed up a little bit here. Princess Zara, you heard, you talked about education as being core to even, basic financial access for women. And you also talked about role models and the importance of role models. Can you say a little bit about organizations that you know that are making headway in the gender diversity landscape? What are the role model organizations, and what is it that they're doing that makes them different from their peers?
Thank you. I see organizations all over the world that are using, again, technology and access through mobile technology to allow women to access finances and services that they didn't access before. The fact of not having to travel physically to an institution or to a bank branch or whatever kind of service provider one would need to access as a woman is making a huge difference, in my view, to the way that women are able to access all services in our world. And when you're using a mobile phone or a mobile device, it doesn't matter whether you're a woman or a man, it makes no difference. You're a customer and you're accessing a service. I see that in so many different sectors of society and the economy. And I believe that when you give a woman a sort of distance and quite anonymous access to these services, be it in the health sector, we see this with mobile health and diagnosis, or banking, women just take the lead and they access the services that they access, and they learn the terms, the terminology that's required to access those services for their families, for their children, for their households. And I believe that this is a massive step forward in our world for women, and recognizing the institutions like the State Bank of Pakistan, which is facilitating this for women. I think that we're facing a sea change today.
Wonderful, thank you. Dr. Bashalu, if I can ask, Governor Bakir said a little bit about how social norms can pose a significant barrier to women's participation in the labor force and women's access to financial services. Can you tell us a little bit about what other countries have done to overcome these barriers that Pakistan can learn from?
So there are different reasons for impacting the access of women to financial services. So there are legal barriers, there are institutional regulatory barriers, and of course, social norms. And in terms of legal issues, access to collateral is a big issue, because many women in many countries sometimes even need their husband's signature to be able to have access to collateral. So what many countries have done is work on these regulatory changes, but also looking at innovative schemes like using different types of collateral that don't require such legal such legal changes. So for example, we have seen in many countries really looking at how small and medium-sized enterprises can have better access to credit. And that is for women and for men, and especially 90% of some of these enterprises are really led by led by women, and in that case, making sure that they can have the access to different services and using digital financial services, which allows anonymity, as mentioned, makes a big difference. So I would say looking at first collecting information as to what are the key sources of lack of access and addressing each of these, be it legal, institutional, and other barriers, is what other countries have done.
Thank you for that. Dr. Bakir, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll have to see if we can squeeze any more in, because I mean, our question bank is from the audience is just incredible, and I'm also, people are separately emailing and WhatsApping me their other questions. So maybe I can pair these two questions together. In most societies where women are not economically valued or not valued at all, the problem has less to do with women and much more to do with men. And specifically how they view and treat women, what they think women's role is in society. And as a male champion on gender, how do you think men should be involved to empower women? How can men be better allies? How can men help women reach their economic potential and help to close the country's gender gap in finance and in other areas?
Thank you. I think you're hitting the nail on the head that this debate and this joint agenda needs as many men champion as many women champions. And the state of the play currently is that in countries like ourselves, men do have lots of positions of power. So they have an opportunity. They have an opportunity that for achieving this goal, and without too much sacrifice to them, they can lead and they can demonstrate. And I think we need more role models who can join this march. At the State Bank, we are doing this event today. As I mentioned, the first goal is to create awareness. And that is half the goal. If everybody, the 1,000+ people who are with us today on Facebook, if they go and talk about it, it should have an effect on others. So we will continue to do this at our end. In the audience today, I was very happy to see amongst the registered participants, we have many leaders in the business community. We have Ms. Jahanara, who is, has been very active in all the fintech scene. We have Muhammad Aurangzeb Saab, who is the president and CEO of Habib Bank Limited and the president of the Pakistani Banks Association. So he's the classic example there of somebody who can play that role of men leading. And if PBA, the Pakistan Banks Association, embraces this as a core agenda, and most of the members are men right now, they can demonstrate. Similarly, we have, I think, as men to reach out to other men and to demonstrate the importance of this and to convince them that just like we at the State Bank want to give this a lot of time, that we do so in the other organizations as well. In this day and age of social media, I think sometimes change can happen a lot faster than it used to before. And it's just getting a critical mass of a few important people and telling them that to promote this cause is not something to feel threatened by, and to promote this cause actually for a lot of men doing business is going to make business sense as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question to you, Jayla, and one question from Princess Zara, and then I'm going to wrap this up and make room for some audience questions. So for you, Dr. Bashalu, so we heard the state bank's policy and the aim to nudge the private sector to apply gender lens on existing and new products, and the sale marketing plans to make product offering more women-friendly, women-centric. What is your view on the need for accurate and timely data collection? Are there organizations that are doing this well, and what can we learn from them?
Thank you for this question. As I mentioned earlier, I think this is a really key part of the strategy of the State Bank of Pakistan, and really needs to be uploaded for. There are quite a lot of both regional, global, and national information on demand side surveys and others. The World Bank has surveys, the IMF has some surveys as well. We have seen the Data 2X initiative, Gates Foundation, yourselves have initiatives, but there are very few countries which are consistently providing information from the financial services industry itself. And actually, Chile is the only country that has been providing this for the last 14 years. So I think it's very important to collect information from the financial sector and set certain targets that are achievable. To me, that will really help us as we learn through this process to really make sure that we can improve the policies and address what are the real causes, because as mentioned before by the others as well, the reasons for exclusion of women are different in different circumstances, and it's very important to be able to understand and diagnose those needs so that the institutional, legal, and regulatory changes can be put in place to address them.
Yeah, and I can add there that the situation is not just limited to financial services. If we look at the Sustainable Development Goal 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, and then you start looking at all of the indicators that are in there, there is the lack of data is just incredible. And so that is one of the priorities of the Gates Foundation, also is trying to really point where the gaps are, and in fact, sometimes funding the indicators, funding primary data collection to fill those gaps. Princess Zara, you've spent so much time with the AKDN focusing on education and the importance of education for both girls and boys. In Pakistan, the gender gap in education, for example, girls that achieve secondary education is about 20%. It's completed secondary education. What do you think? How important do you think higher level education, secondary level education is to really access, become financially literate and empowered?
Thank you, Anita. I believe that my great-grandfather said that if you educate a woman, you educate her entire family. And of course, education is the key to unlocking access for women to all types of, to everything really, from health to, their own children's education and the health of their children and so on and so forth. Of course, it's essential for women to be able to access formal and non-formal education. I think we need to be careful how much pressure we put on women specifically in the population when we look at issues such as microfinance and women's control of the finances of the family. There has been much written and much said about the responsibility that the woman carries in the household already, and it is important that that is a balanced thing. I think as the governor was saying, it's important that both men and women carry the responsibilities together for the financial and educational development of the household. And as we go forward, I would say that women have more and more access to an independent source of be it information, education, banking, microfinance, and so on and so forth. Education is the key to everything for women, but it is for men as well. And so hopefully reaching parity in everything from education to banking is going to be the way forward.
Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you, for a really excellent discussion, a lot of food for thought here. Let me summarize by emphasizing a few key points. One is that this work on financial inclusion for women isn't only about making things equal. It's about creating opportunities for all, for women and girls, as well as for men and boys, an equal chance to live, grow, and be valued. And when we remove the barriers for women and girls to thrive, when we unlock the potential of half of the world's population, half of Pakistan's population, something transformational happens. We unleash a powerful engine for progress from which everyone in society benefits, not just women and girls. And this is the point that Princess Zara was also making. By unleashing more of the world's talent, energy, and creativity into growing economies and solving problems that affect us all, we can around the world make families and communities safer, and around the world and in Pakistan, make everyone safer, stable, and more prosperous. Put simply, equal is greater for everyone. I'm very excited about the launch of this landmark policy on financial inclusion for women in Pakistan, and I look forward to seeing its impact as it rolls out. We will have time for a few questions and answers. I might need some help in knowing how long we can go and if people have hard stops. Let me go to the, so we got some questions before the program even started from, and then there are more than 42 that I see from our 170 plus participants. The first question is from Ms. Jahan Ara, who's the president of Pakistan Software House Association. And this is for Governor Bakir. What plans does the State Bank for Pakistan have for facilitating and easing the process of account opening for housewives who do not have access to employment certificates or other such documents?
So this is an excellent question. And let me say at the outset that we need to do a lot more to be able to make it easier for such women to open bank accounts. It is a problem that we need to address. And we have to understand a little bit why it is a problem as well, because historically and unfortunately, there have often been instances where men have basically used the identity card of their spouses to be able to open accounts, and those accounts have been used to conduct transactions that ended up being suspicious transactions. And after many such things, and especially considering Pakistan was in the gray list under FATF, Pakistan had to introduce very fairly strict regulations on customer due diligence for account opening. So there is some backdrop to it. Now, we need to make this more tailored, and we need to move forward to make it easier for such women who are excluded to be able to do so. And let me give you some examples. One is that the State Bank of Pakistan has allowed something called an Asan account. Asan in English just means easy. This is a simplified account opening requirements procedure that should facilitate housewives. Another piece of information that I want to share is that sometimes the problem that occurs is that when housewives go to open an account, the bank asks them for source of income. And if they're not working, the bank asks them to provide their husband's source of income. And sometimes a problem comes about there because the husband may not be aware or may not be as keen for the woman to open an account. So we need to, in those cases, communicate better that women can show their savings that they have as a source of income and a source of funds that they can open an account. Ultimately, all that the bank needs is some comfort that the amount of balances in those accounts are not out of line with the sources of income of the person who is opening that account. But let me end my answer on something which I think is the way of the future, which is digital account opening. Pakistan recently introduced something called Roshan digital accounts or overseas Pakistanis. For the first time in our history, we've made it possible without compromising on customer due diligence for non-resident Pakistanis to be able to open bank accounts without visiting any bank branch or without visiting any embassy or consulate. We have a plan to also try to bring this on domestically and to allow digital onboarding. And I think Princess Zara spoke about the benefit of also having an anonymous interaction. Digital onboarding does allow you to do that. And as we move towards that part of our digital journey, we think that it is going to materially help with the account opening of housewives and more generally, then allowing lending and credit to reach women as well. And I also want to make a plug for all people working in the fintech space. And Ms. Jahanara is a leader in that space, that there are business opportunities out there for potential fintech players to come and figure out a way, knowing the social norms in Pakistan, to be able to offer a business proposition that makes money. And if you need any facilitation at all from the State Bank, we will be there. Our deputy governor, who is leading this work, is there, and both these areas come under her. So we are very keen to entertain such business ideas as well that allow entrepreneurs to tap into, the fifth largest country of women is Pakistan. That's a big market. And there are opportunities there. So we at the State Bank will facilitate whoever wants to come here.
Thank you. I think you addressed a couple of the questions that were also in the Q&A that's being put in the live chat over here. I have a question from Mr. Mohammad Aurangzeb, Chairman of the Pakistan Banks Association, and this is for Jayla. What affirmative actions can banks take to provide a conducive environment, making the financial industry the employer of choice for women entering the workforce?
I think there are many different studies that look at how to incentivize women to apply for different jobs. This includes providing benefits like childcare services and so on and so forth, to making sure that panels are diverse so that they look at different candidates and they are more open to different candidates. So I think it's more really making this as an important objective and potentially even setting targets. There are many countries who have decided to have quotas in terms of female participation in their boards or in their institutions. So I think it's really deciding this as an objective and then looking at what are different ways, including opportunities for providing women with benefits, as I mentioned, and also looking at a bigger pool of women and providing training or other facilities to make sure that they can adjust to these possible workplace that may not have been traditional workplace for them.
Great, thank you for that. I think I could squeeze in perhaps two more. I have a question from Miss Annabelle Jerry, from the head of the Pakistan FCDO, formerly the DFID program. And this is for both Jayla and the governor. She is congratulating you for organizing today's event and launch of the consultation, and then asking what steps should be taken to expand credit to women-owned SMEs, especially if they, we talked about this a little bit, if they don't have collateral, right? What can we do?
Would you like to go first, Jayla?
Sure. I think there we mentioned the use of collateral. That's really important. But again, to mention here, the digital data is very important, right? Especially for digital financial services. So being able to record even small amounts of borrowing or small amounts of, rolling credit to women, or being able to offer what we call micro insurance. So there are different ways of providing the types of services that women SMEs or in SMEs in general would need, that I think are made much more possible with using digital access. So I think that would be the key focus in my view.
Thank you. So there are a lot of good questions from the audience. Maybe I will take this one, and maybe Seema, Kamil, you might want to take this one. I'm including you in the panel now. It's from Sadia Khan, SCCP. She says, do you find that the lack of ownership of assets by women due to our inheritance laws limit female inclusion, given the need for collateral for most land products?
I think we need to research that a little bit more, but the inheritance laws, I don't think do that, because I think very often women do own assets. I think the bigger issue than the ownership of assets or inheritance is their actual decision-making power on those assets. I think, Sadia, we can discuss that too. But I think it's they own assets. They don't have control on those assets very often. I think that's a bigger issue. But it's also obviously out of the ambit of this policy and of the ambit of the state bank. But yes, the ownership of assets is certainly there, but whether they effectively own them as decision makers is more the issue.
Okay,
So,
thank you. So I'm going to suggest, I'm going to just do one last question for Princess Zara, and then I think we have to call it quits, and hopefully the State Bank excellent leadership can answer many of the other questions and take the comments into account. Princess Zara, you talked a little bit about community empowerment when we were having our preamble and what was important to you, and how do you think about community empowerment and us, even in this current sort of low literacy situation, how can that change life for women, keeping also now the COVID tragedy in mind?
That's a very, very broad question. I think it depends how you choose to see it. In Pakistan, for many decades now, we've had experience with a number of community type organizations, village organizations, women's organizations, and depending on how those are structured and set up, they give a lot of strength and power to communities, be it women's communities or mixed gender communities. It's certainly, I believe, something that gives strength. And I think that microfinance, over the history of microfinance, from the birth of microfinance, I believe in the 60s, has shown that the strength of the community organization makes the strength of the savings and the banking organization itself. And therefore, it's something that is critical. Also, communities tend to educate each other. They tend to spread knowledge and spread information. As we've seen with COVID, the measures that prevent infection and the measures that keep families safe are also spread by community information and power. Therefore, communities are essential. Ownership of any kind of resource, be it a health center or a microfinance program, a savings organization, is really anchored in the community's attachment and feeling of ownership in whichever program it is that they're participating in or that they themselves created. And therefore, I do believe, I think this is what you asked me, that the community is essential in building any form of resilience, any form of resources for themselves. And we, potentially NGOs and other institutions, international institutions and banks, can provide advice and technology, but the community is essential in everything that goes around development in all sectors, including banking and finance.
Dr. Anita, I wanted to, with your permission, and as we close, did want to come back to one question that I forgot to answer on SMEs and the availability for women to access such borrowing. And I want to take advantage of this occasion to bring attention to something that I'm surprised many women do not know about, which is a concessional financing scheme available through the state bank, where the state bank lends to commercial banks and they on lend to the end user. And this is a scheme whereby women can get loans for up to 5 million rupees at an end user interest rate of 5%, and one where there is 60% risk coverage being provided to the bank. So that what this means is that the traditional issues of collateral can be to a considerable extent be overcome. What I'm surprised about is that many women do not know about this, even though it's on our website, even though we tweet about it and we use other channels. So I do want to use this occasion to also convey a message to all the women listening into this event that this facility is available. As of now, only about 810 women in Pakistan have availed this, and only about 613 million rupees have been disbursed out of that. So I want to encourage women to try to take use of this. And if you are experiencing problems where you feel you have provided all the documentation, but the banks are unnecessarily creating obstacles in the way, then please reach out to us on this email address that's going to be shared to you at the closing of this event, an email address dedicated for gender issues and financial inclusion. And at the State Bank, we are very keen to ensure that inappropriate reasons are not used to curtail provision of credit to women.
That's a really useful message to get out. So I'm so inspired by the conversation today and look forward to seeing this in action. We are horribly out of time, 13 minutes over time. So I'm going to pass it back to Faika for closing this out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anita. With this, we will close the webinar. I want to thank all the participants. Thank you so much for your participation at this very important session. I'm grateful to thousands of participants who joined us today, and we really appreciate the public interest in State Bank of Pakistan's banking on equality policy. Now, the consultative process with banks, DFIs, microfinance banks, and other stakeholders will commence, which is a step that is incredibly important to make this policy a success. We also want feedback from the public, and we look forward to receiving your comments through the email address you can see on your screens right now. It's gender@spp.org.pk. Thank you once again. Goodbye and Allah Hafiz.